We're playing Matrix 1, 2, 3, dealer small, big blind,
Yep.
and effective stacks are going to be about 880.
880. And whenever I go play in the Bay Area, I always forget the ultra small blind on the button, and I find myself folding when I probably should be completing with any two in given situations. I'm like, shit, I'm already in. Shit. But 1, 2, 3, 880 effective. Okay.
Right. And I have pocket fives
Okay.
in the hijack position.
Okay.
Open it up to 12, get one color on the button,
Okay.
and this guy, I've played with him a little bit already, and he's a thinking player, but I don't know like what level of thinking he is, but he definitely takes the game a lot more seriously. No drinking. He's usually pretty quiet when he plays, and I can just see his like brain working.
You aren't the guy that called in where that was like where logic fails, Bart Hanson's favorite call on YouTube. Are you the same guy?
No, no, different
Okay.
color. This is my
Okay. You
first time.
say you sound similar to that guy. Okay. So button calls.
Right, and so we go heads up to a flop of 6 5 deuce rainbow. So the flop is $20 after you take off the rake,
Okay.
and I check. Villain bets 20, and then I check raise to 80. So I chose this line just because I felt like if I was gonna go for the bet or the check raise, then I'm essentially representing like over pairs are better, and he would recognize that. So I opted for the option that would largen the pot the fastest.
Well, that's not a bad thought. Sometimes in single race pots, when you flop something really, really big, you have to do some somewhat non-standard things to get more money in the pot, right? Like it's not like this is a three bet pot. I will say it is pretty. It's something that I haven't necessarily explored all that much, but check raising as the pre-flop raiser on the flop is somewhat of a complex, type of thing. And you probably should have some check raises because when you check, if you never have check raises, then your opponent just knows he's never going to get raised off of equity. If he bets, you're either going to check fold or check call. So, I don't hate it. It's somewhat of a late configuration. Obviously, the button can have like a lot of hands. He probably shouldn't have 3 4. I think that's a little bit too far down the line. So if you take out 3 4, the only thing that you're really losing to here is 6 6. And if you're opening all pairs from the hijack, then I could get on board with it. Would you ever consider doing this with like a hand like aces or kings here too?
Oh, for sure, for
Interesting.
sure.
Interesting.
Okay, and then before we go, actually, I want to correct one thing. The effective sizes were actually 520.
Oh, 520. Okay. Well, it's still pretty deep. Obviously, when you're opening to 12 because it's still almost 200 big blinds, but it's not as crazy as what it was at 880, right?
Right. It's
Yeah.
173 big blinds.
Okay. So you check, button bets 20, and you check raise to 80. Okay.
Hmm.
So he calls, right?
Yeah, he calls.
Uh huh.
Turn comes to 9, which brings a backdoor flush draw. I believe it's diamonds. It's not going to be super relevant, but it does complete 7 8.
Okay.
So now the pot is 180 ish.
Mm-hmm.
I bet 90, and I choose this half pot sizing just to keep all of his like middling over pairs in maybe, but also going for value versus his like pocket twos, his 6 5, and maybe I guess his 5 2s, but I don't really see him playing that hand.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I still lose to 7 8 and 3 4 and pocket sixes.
Yeah.
Okay, and so bet half pot and maybe like 2 seconds, but he basically snap calls.
So button calls, backdoor diamonds come in. So this, I mean, I know that you didn't say that it wasn't relevant, but I actually do think it is relevant when you're going back and you're trying to study hands specifically with different textures of having with the backdoor suit like on rainbow boards, right? Because I would like to know if top pair was represented with the diamond, like if it was the six of diamonds. I'd like to know which fives you have in your hand. It's subtle things though. If it comes into play on the backdoor side, if the backdoor flush comes in, maybe it won't, but it is somewhat subtle to look back at the flop texture. So it's not something to necessarily just wash over. Now, on the turn here, you bet 90. It's kind of interesting because the probable draw, like if we were to say on 6 5 deuce rainbow, if we took out 3 4 and we said, okay, what are the what's the most probable draw someone can have on 6-5 deuce rainbow? It's 7-8, right?
Right, right.
I mean, they could have wheel draws like ace three, ace four, maybe that were flatted. Those are sort of bad wheel draws in the sense that they put out sort of one-liners to a straights, but they could continue on here too. I wonder if this card is always reflected with a bet. I'm not saying that I would check it, but it is something to note.
Right. And so in hindsight, I definitely thought about checking this card instead and just keeping his range wider and allowing him to bluff. Um, but I also didn't see him on like a wheel draw with an ace. I just didn't think he was going to call a check raise with that hand specifically.
The other thing specifically, Ray, I want to say too that some people in the live chat make up a good point out too is that I'm not a huge fan of this sizing. I think you should go 2/3 here because I don't know what is folding out here at like going 120 to 130 versus 90. Like I still think that all the pairs and straight draws, things like that you're ahead of are still going to call. So I think you might lose a little bit of value here by not going to 120, 130 here on the turn.
Yeah, I think the main hands I was trying to go for value here with a half pot bet was like all of his middling overpairs, like eights, nine, eight, sevens, stuff like that.
I just think that those hands are still calling though. 120 to 130. They pick up a gut shot here on the turn. Also, you have again too. You do have some. If there were some ace X of diamonds flatted here that took off with a backdoor. Although you did check raise, so like ace nine, ace 10 of diamonds. It's one thing like if you bet really small and they called, but it would seem to me that your check raise would eliminate a lot of those very very light types of floats. But okay, so you bet 90 and he snap calls, which is indicative too sometimes too by way of some sort of draw when there's a snap call. But it looks like the pot's 360. Okay.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so one final point before moving on to the river, I thought he would most likely raise all of his non-straight hands. So when he like essentially snap calls on the turn, like red flags. Okay. So
what do you mean? I don't understand. What do you mean red flags?
By him just like smooth calling that turn pretty fast, I thought he was weighted more towards straights.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you in that sense, but I will say it does bring up another interesting point that if you ever make a bet, and it's usually a larger bet than this, where when you're called, you're thinking, oh, fuck, I'm beat, then you've done something wrong. I actually don't think that's the case in this spot. I wouldn't think that. But there certainly are spots where people are like, oh, I bet 2/3 or I bet pot. And when he called, I was like, oh, shit. And I was like, well, you were betting for value, right? And the guy was like, yeah, well, then something's amiss. Now, if you want to say it was like a live tell, I mean, that's something different,
For sure. Okay. Well, moving on to the river, comes out the 10 and it breaks off the flush draw and no other like feasible straight completes.
So that doesn't really change anything,
Right,
especially
right.
if the button is three bet. If let's just assume that the button is three betting tens, then that card actually doesn't change anything, right?
Right. I definitely think he would be three betting cents. I guess the only like scary card he could have is maybe like a turn set of nines as well. That now beats me.
Uh huh.
But the river is going to be 360.
Yep.
And I opt for a pretty small bet of 120 into 360, so 1/3 pot, just to get value from the previous hands.
So hero bets 120. Now I just want to do a little backwards math here. You put in 90 on turn, 80 on flop, 170, 180. So it looks like you've got 340 left. So you have like a pot size bet left here, right? I mean, just a pot size bet left. It's interesting with the sizing because really, what are you trying to target here? Although I will say, like, I'd almost want to go smaller on like a card that's really traditionally good for you, like a king or an ace, thinking there's no way the guy's going to call, with some sort of middling pair. Whereas a 10, I mean, still like I've seen guys hero call down here with sevens or eights here. So I probably don't mind the 1/3 size bet as opposed to just like straight jamming. But I would actually probably tend to bet a little bit smaller in a high disconnected card, funny enough.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, that was basically my same like thought process. Because I felt like to me, a large part of his range was straights,
I just got a caller. Hold on one second. I just got a Mathemagical 55 says maybe check call here. Why would you want to check call? The only time you would ever check call here is if somebody was turning like 7-6 here into a bluff. What are the draws that are unpaired? Everyone's going to be happy to just check back down any pair behind here. If they think that the opponent is making a move here with ace king, I can't even begin to fathom why you would check call here at the end. Not that you said that, caller. I'm just making a comment.
Right. And so I did not think he was going to be calling me with any more of his like middling pairs, like any seven or eights. So that's why that wasn't even like in the range.
Okay, so you bet 120. Yep.
Yeah, and I was going for value again versus his twos, six fives, really.
Uh-huh.
And then he does something crazy, shoves 340 total. So now I have to call 220 to win about 820, I think.
So 480 plus 340, yeah, 820, and it's 220. I mean, I got to tell you, like, I'm not going to fold here for these pot odds getting 4-1. I mean, you're just going to give them 7-8. So, I mean, is it any different if you had sixes or nines here? Or are you specifically scared of nines and sixes too? I mean, obviously it is a little bit different. I'm just saying.
Well, if I had sixes or nines, I'm never folding. I mean, I know on the turn I said that I thought he was going to raise all of his non-straight hands, but like by this river, if he's raising me, I got to factor in like the off chance he doesn't raise with those sets.
I'm not folding getting 4-1 here. I mean, if you were to tell me you bet 1/3 and then it was like kind of pop back to you, and then, again, kind of a small stakes exploit where, really the guy's bluffs would probably need to be composed here of, it really does need to be composed of a pair. I mean, 7-8 is already there. 7-9 is a gut shot that's paired up. 8-9 is a gut shot that's paired up. It's just something that I don't really see all that much. I'm talking about if it was a large raise size, but still, I think at some point pot odds here is going to dictate that. I'm sorry. I mean, it is slightly worse. Now, if you want to say, oh, I had deuce here and I was thinking about making some sort of hero call for a little bit less of a price where you lose to all the sets, maybe, but even still with deuce, I'd have a hard time folding here, but I'm not going to fold 5-5 here. What happened?
So I ended up tank folding my fives, and it was the hardest fold I've ever made at 1-2-3. And after waiting out for a little bit, he later on told me that he had pocket eights turned into a bluff.
Well, I mean, I guess it's possible, but this is part of the reason why you'd have to call it that price. Because I think the difference, though, is that even though it looks like there's less fold equity from your opponent's perspective, it's like now you only need to be good 1 out of 5 times versus like if you raise pot, you'd have to be good 1 out of 3 times, and he's risking more money. So that's what I think the difference is in a given spot like that.
Even though I was getting such a great price, and I totally understand that, right? 200 to win about 800, which is like I gotta win 20% of the time just to break even. I thought that this line by Villain was so strong that I wasn't even good 1 in 5 times. And I know I have a set.
Yeah, I wouldn't be folding hands like that strong, though, at this level. I got to be perfectly honest with you. But I appreciate the call. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.